I never thought I'd be writing this story, but here I am at 35, watching my life take turns I never expected. It all started about a year ago when my wife and I became friends with another couple in our neighborhood. They had kids around the same age as our two children, 6 and 4. And it seemed like we'd finally found the perfect family friends we'd been looking for since moving to my wife's hometown 5 years ago. The friendship started innocently enough. Our kids would play together, we'd have family dinners, and since my wife and the other husband were both stay-at-home parents, they naturally spent more time together during the day. I was busy with my work as a physician, often pulling long hours, so I was actually happy that my wife had found someone to talk to during those long weekdays with the kids. Looking back now, I can see the signs I missed. My wife started going to counseling in early spring, saying she was feeling depressed. She began working out and losing weight, which I thought was great for her self-confidence. She even asked me to try couples counseling, but I brushed it off, thinking we were doing fine. That was probably my first big mistake. Our marriage had always seemed solid to me. We'd been together for 14 years, married for 10. Sure, we had our ups and downs with intimacy, but what couple doesn't? We never went more than a month without being intimate, though I knew she wanted more. I was probably depressed myself, constantly worried about our finances despite making good money. We had an expensive lifestyle, and the stress of it all was weighing on me. Things started getting strange when we went on a family vacation in July. My wife told me that the other wife had discovered a thread of texts between her and the husband. She said it was nothing inappropriate, just a lot of messages, though she mentioned there was one, "I love you," that was meant as a joke. She offered to show me the texts, but in a way that made it clear she hoped I wouldn't want to see them. Being the trusting husband I was, I said it was fine. After we returned home, my anxiety started creeping in. I noticed small changes. The way she was constantly texting, how she bought him a present a week before my birthday, something she had to craft herself with iron-on patches, and gave it to him while I was at work. When I questioned her about it, she got defensive, saying I was invading her privacy by asking about the texts. I started feeling like I was losing my mind. I found myself checking Find My Friends and our home security cameras more often than I'd like to admit. I wasn't sleeping or eating well, and my depression was getting worse. I started seeing a therapist and got on medication, trying to convince myself I was just being paranoid. But then I talked to the other wife, who I worked with. That's when the truth started coming out. There weren't just occasional friendly texts. There were daily good morning and good night messages, pet names, and multiple I love yous. One night, my wife had even called me by one of these pet names in her sleep. And when I asked her about it the next day, she brushed it off, saying I was her pet name. But after learning the truth, I knew that name wasn't meant for me. When I confronted them both, they apologized and agreed to stop with the pet names and I love yous. The other couple even set a boundary: no more private communication between opposite-sex members of our families. I thought that would be the end of it, but little did I know, this was just the beginning of a much deeper betrayal. What happened next would shake the foundations of everything I believed about my marriage, my wife, and the life we'd built together. 3 weeks after they agreed to stop communicating, I got a devastating call. The other wife had checked their phone records and discovered they were still talking, not just occasionally, but for hours every day. They'd have 40-minute calls at 4 a.m. when he was driving to work, hour-and-a-half calls at night when I was working overnight shifts, and regular chats during lunch breaks. The pattern was clear. They always talked when I wasn't around. We finally started couples therapy, where my wife swore to both me and the therapist that all communication had stopped. She said she wanted to rebuild trust so our families could be friends again, mainly for the kids' sake. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But one morning something caught my eye on our home security camera. My wife taking what looked like a suggestive selfie. That night, I managed to access her computer and found her photo stream. What I discovered felt like a punch to the gut. There were months of sensual photos going back to August. No actual nudity, but poses and looks I'd never seen from her before. Mixed in were all these quotes about finding your second love and not being able to be with the one you love because of circumstances. It was like reading someone else's love story, except that someone was my wife. When confronted, she admitted they'd been using a secret messaging app even before our big fight about the boundaries. She swore there was nothing physical. But how could I believe anything anymore? Then, just days later, the truth I'd been dreading came out. Her affair partner confessed to his wife. They'd been physically intimate since August, multiple times. All those nights she'd gone running errands or hired a babysitter suddenly made sense. One night in particular stood out. When she turned off her location sharing and hired a sitter before I got home from work. When I'd questioned her about it the next day, she showed me a picture with a friend as an alibi. It had all been planned, calculated. In our next therapy session, my wife still couldn't come clean about the physical relationship. I finally broke down and told her I knew everything. We cried together, and she seemed ashamed, but the very next day she went to his workplace, claiming she needed closure. She said he drove away and she followed briefly before turning around and calling me. But how could I trust that version of events? How could I know she hadn't gone hoping to continue their relationship, only to find him unwilling? The worst part was that everything I discovered came from someone else or my own digging. She never volunteered any information, never came clean on her own. Even after everything came to light, she refused to share her passwords when the therapist suggested it, claiming she needed her privacy. But what right to privacy remains after such a breach of trust? We moved into separate bedrooms during the holidays, trying to keep things civil for the kids. I listened to an audiobook called Leave a Cheater, Gain a Life, which helped me see things more clearly. We managed to get through Christmas with only minor tensions, but New Year's was especially hard. It would have been our 14th anniversary as a couple. I spent it with friends, all couples, which probably wasn't the best idea. Being the only single person among 7 happy couples really drives home how much your life has changed. As the reality of our situation sank in, I knew what I had to do next. The question wasn't if anymore, but how and when. We had one last family trip, a museum visit we'd promised our son for his birthday. It was bearable most of the time, but being around her for extended periods just made everything more difficult. The constant phone checking, the little habits that now irritated me. It all confirmed we were making the right decision. Though my lawyer said I had every right to surprise her with divorce papers and separate our finances immediately, I chose a different path. I kept our accounts joint, and she didn't try to move any money around. When she saw her own lawyer, she came back and said either of us could file. I told her I wanted to, and she agreed. She was ready. Filing those papers felt like lifting a weight off my shoulders. Things moved quickly after that. She found a job in a house, and we worked out a custody arrangement that actually suits my schedule well. Since I'm a doctor with irregular hours, I can pick up the kids at 2 p.m. on school days instead of the usual after-work time, giving me more quality time with them. We even managed to agree on holidays without much drama. After we agreed, we could see other people. I started seeing someone. It was eye-opening to feel desired again, to experience what had been missing from my marriage. But things got complicated when she told me she loved me after just 12 days. Way too fast, especially given everything I was going through. Meanwhile, I discovered my wife was probably seeing someone new too. Another married man she met through her volunteer work. They were exchanging hundreds of texts daily, even during our last family trip. She'd be at dinner with us, supposedly present for family time, but sending 220 messages between 6:30 and 8:30 p.m. She started going to his house for work meetings that would last from 8 to 11 p.m., and there were lots of late-night texts around midnight and 1 a.m. It seemed like we hadn't even finished destroying 2 families before she was potentially starting on a third. I also found evidence suggesting she might be back in contact with her affair partner. A screenshot from their secret messaging app, taken on New Year's Day, showed his picture with a longer beard than before. But at this point, I had to let it go. The divorce was moving forward, and that's what mattered. Tonight is the first night she's not sleeping in our house. She moved out and took the kids with her for their first stay at her new place. I'm sitting here looking at our wedding photo, seeing how happy she was back then, wondering what changed. My friends are coming over tomorrow and the next day to help keep my mind off things, but right now, the sadness is overwhelming. I know I'll be okay eventually. The kids will have both of us in their lives, and we'll find a way to co-parent effectively. I still love her, or maybe I love who she used to be, but I've accepted that she's changed. She's not the same person who smiled so brightly in that wedding photo anymore. The house feels empty tonight. Maybe it's better this way. No more checking phones or cameras, no more lies, no more pretending. But it doesn't make it hurt any less. I'll never forget her or the good times we had, but I also can't forget how it all fell apart. Tomorrow is another day, and somehow I'll find a way to move forward. But tonight, I'm allowing myself to just sit with this sadness, knowing it's part of the healing process.